Good morning, good afternoon on the East Coast, and good morning in Central Time. On behalf of Third Way, I'd like to welcome you all. In July, the House of Representatives passed the Moving Forward Act, providing over $1.5 trillion in federal spending across a range of infrastructure areas, including surface transportation. The way in which we choose to spend on infrastructure and to rebuild our nation's highways will be vitally important as we work to recover from the economic crisis we now face. At this critical juncture, we have an opportunity to rethink federal and state transportation policy. Policymakers have long considered highway expansion a way to connect communities and address congestion. But all over the country, it has actually led to more congestion, poor air quality, the displacement of Black, brown, and poor residents, and as we'll hear later, the destruction of the historical legacy of many of these communities. But there is a way to get people back to work quickly, improve the nation's infrastructure, spend taxpayer dollars effectively, and do it fairly and equitably for all Americans. And it's easy to remember: fix it first. In a few minutes, you'll hear from a team of federal policy and community experts on why Fix It First is important, how it can support these communities, and in particular, how it can help in Houston, Texas, where there is a proposed expansion of I-45. But I'll let my co-host, Ani Blair, Executive Director of Link Houston, tell you more about that. Ani?
Good morning. Thank you, Jared and Alex, for the invitation to be here. My name is Ani Blair, and I serve as Executive Director of Link Houston. Link Houston advocates for a robust and equitable transportation network so that all people can reach opportunity. Since the 1950s, highway construction throughout the United States has created physical barriers in low-income communities and communities of color, disrupting neighborhoods and preventing people from accessing opportunities. Today, I want to focus specifically on the North Houston Highway Improvement Project, or the I-45 expansion project. The Texas Department of Transportation plans to extend 24 miles of highway from downtown Houston in Houston's core north all the way to Greens Point, which is an area into the Bush Intercontinental Airport. The stated purpose of the project is to, quote, provide a safer facility with additional capacity for projected demand, end quote, at cost of $7 billion. Many residents living next to the project and advocates are concerned that the project will advance without addressing displacement, flooding, air quality, cultural and historic preservation, and other concerns raised by residents. The Texas Department of Transportation's 2017 draft environmental impact statement specifically acknowledges that the proposed project will, quote, cause disproportionate and highly adverse impacts to minority or low-income populations. The neighborhoods adjacent to the project are 2/3 or more people of color. The same public document estimates the project will displace more than 1,000 homes, including low-income housing and homeless veterans housing, and more than 300 businesses that employ over 24,000 people. The project is currently planned will displace historic sites and communities of color and service providers residents rely on every day. The Texas Department of Transportation claims there will be no impact to air quality. Over the last 3 years, Link Houston, along with Airlines Houston, dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of residents, and 20 or more organizations in the community have advocated to fix this project. Ideally, the project would stay within a current footprint, which would decrease the impact on communities of color and preserve histories and the social fabric. In 2019, we won $51.5 million in additional funds for impacted communities. And over the last year, we successfully urged Houston's mayor to pursue a public engagement endeavor, changing the standard for public engagement on an infrastructure project. Following the public re-evaluation project, the mayor changed his mind about the project. He sent a letter to our Texas Transportation Commissioner outlining a new vision for the project based on community feedback and centered on reduced environmental impacts and disruption of neighborhoods and embracing growth. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who will join us later today, as well as other elected officials, also issued a letter to the commissioner for their support for the mayor's new direction on the project. But despite this pushback, the Texas Department of Transportation is moving forward on the I-45 project. The Metropolitan Planning Organization has pushed the Texas Department of Transportation, along with the city and the county, to join in negotiating a memorandum of understanding to address some of these concerns. Later, you'll hear community members who have been staunch advocates for their neighborhoods, both now on the I-45 project, as well as in past highway projects that have impacted their communities. But first, it is my honor to introduce Houston's well-known elected official, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is an influential and forceful voice in Washington and a staunch defender of the 18th Congressional District of Texas. She serves as a senior member of the House Committees on the Judiciary and the Homeland Security, and was supported by the leadership as a member of the Crucial Budget Committee. As mentioned earlier, she's been deeply involved in the I-45 project, from engaging with residents at community meetings to raising environmental justice issues on this project on the House floor. I introduce you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
And I think Congresswoman Jackson Lee hasn't been able to join us just yet. So what we'll do is we'll go straight to our first panel of national experts, and that will be moderated by Third Way's Jackie Toth. Give us 1 second to transition.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to keep this conversation going. This afternoon, we are joined today by Alexander Laska, who serves as the Transportation Policy Advisor for Third Way's Climate and Energy Program, where he focuses on advancing federal policies to eliminate carbon pollution from the transportation sector and make our transportation network cleaner, safer, and more accessible for everyone. He's previously worked on transportation issues in Congress and at the Eno Center for Transportation. Also with us this afternoon is Matt Casale, Environment Campaigns Director at USPIRG, a national nonpartisan nonprofit advocate for the public interest. Matt works on USPIRG's transportation, zero waste, toxics, and climate campaigns, and has authored several reports and white papers on transportation policy, including an annual report called Highway Boondoggles, which profiles some of the largest highway expansion projects in the nation and explores more affordable, efficient, and environmentally healthy alternatives. Last but not least, we're joined by Dr. Bakia Nelson, Executive Director of Air Alliance Houston, a nonprofit organization that works with communities unequally burdened by air pollution to advocate for public policies that improve air quality, promote public health, and advance environmental justice. She has a diverse background in public health and public policy and has been working to reduce environmental inequities where people live, work, learn, and play in Houston communities for over 10 years. So we'll start now with about a 30-minute panel discussion and then open it up for audience questions for about 15 minutes afterward. So you're welcome to submit questions at any time for our panelists. Bakia, I'd like to start with you. Ani and Jared are talking in their opening remarks here about the I-45 expansion project. What is Air Alliance Houston's interest in this, particularly as it relates to how the project would impact the air quality of nearby communities?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question and for the opportunity to speak today. Air Alliance Houston believes that everyone has a right to breathe clean air, and where you live, work, learn, and play should not impact your health. And so there are a number of reasons why Air Alliance Houston is interested in this project. First, children's health should not be negotiated or compromised. And we know that research studies have shown that children going to school within 500 feet of a high traffic roadway have increased risks of asthma, impaired lung development, childhood leukemia, and other illnesses. And the expansion design as is would expand the highway width by as much as 70% in some areas. The Texas Department of Transportation's own report suggests that as many as 41 schools, daycares, hospitals, and parks will be trapped within this 500-foot zone after the expansion. Our organization also conducted a health impact assessment of the project that found that many of the schools along the corridor already have children that experience higher asthma rates than other schools in their district, and also have a higher use of emergency services to treat asthma than other schools in their district. Asthma is also among one of the top reasons that children miss school. And we know that academic performance suffers when children are absent. So when you layer exposing children to more air pollution with what has happened and is happening with education since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, the government is not only setting the children attending these schools up for failure, but also knowingly harming their health. And for us, that is really unacceptable. Another reason why we're interested in this project is that we were recently reclassified from moderate non-attainment to serious non-attainment for ground level ozone. And we know that ground level ozone is a pollutant that triggers asthma attacks, among other health issues. Even more troubling than that is that asthma disproportionately impacts children of color who are unequally exposed to air pollution. So as an example, Black children have a death rate from asthma that is 10 times the rate of non-Hispanic white children, and are hospitalized 4 times at the rate of non-Hispanic white children. And then lastly, the project is diametrically opposed to the spirit of the Climate Action Plan that Houston just released. The Climate Action Plan calls for a significant decrease in vehicle miles traveled. And we know that this project will only increase vehicle miles traveled. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Becky. We know Houston's not really unique in putting forward these so-called highway boondoggles. Matt, can you tell us about some other highway widening projects across the country and how local communities there are responding?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me today. Really excited to be on this webinar and be able to talk about this. You know, the Texas Department of Transportation is certainly known for these big highway expansions, and there may be no one across the country that quite matches them. But unfortunately, you know, you look at nearly every corner of the country, every state in the country, and you can find some sort of really big, bad highway expansion. And I'll just highlight a few, but certainly this list, again, unfortunately, is not exhaustive. So you look out west in Portland, Oregon, they're currently, the Oregon Department of Transportation is currently trying to move forward with an expansion of I-5, which goes right through a neighborhood in Portland called the Rose Corridor. And, you know, like Bakia was saying, this one is right near a school, and the expansion would go right through a neighborhood that already has some of the worst air pollution in the state. The local community has identified and have been talking about their need for improved walking and biking options and improved access in the neighborhood, and this expansion just goes counter to that because it just cuts off a whole nother section of the neighborhood. Their local activists have really taken up the cause and are really fighting it. Unfortunately, as of yet, the Oregon Department of Transportation hasn't listened and are still trying to go forward with it, although I'd keep an eye on that one. Come back over to the East Coast in Florida. Florida is currently proposing to add about 300 miles of toll roads, mostly through protected wetlands. You know, there's a lot of wildlife at stake there, and this would be in service of trying to reduce traffic in some of the more urban areas, but you know, it's taking away from some of the other needs in those areas and really just putting new pavement down in places we shouldn't be doing that, and we'll be just adding traffic to these other places. And then just, you know, up the East Coast a little bit in Maryland, potentially one of the most egregious examples is this $9, 10, $11 billion project. The price tag keeps going up to widen the Beltway and widen another highway right outside Washington, D.C. And this is going forward as a public-private partnership, and there have been claims that this isn't going to cost the taxpayers anything, which is just, you know, if someone tells you that a big public project is not going to cost the taxpayers anything, you should be a little skeptical of that. But it also ignores the societal costs of widening these roads. It's not going to help with traffic, but it is going to increase air pollution. It is going to increase climate emissions. And, you know, they're pouring all this money into this project at the same time that they can't really much needed transit extension in Baltimore. And, you know, these are examples of the types of projects you see across the country and the things that state DOTs are trying to do at the expense of the other things that they need to do. And, you know, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Matt. Well, clearly a pervasive issue here. Bakia, I want to turn back to you. It's important when we're talking about communities to understand that a lot of the time our infrastructure is built in places where it will have the greatest negative impacts on communities of color and low-income households. In the case of I-45, who is being impacted the most by this project?
Well, as Ani mentioned, TxDOT's own analysis recognizes that 2/3 or more of the people who will be adversely impacted by this project are communities of color, Black and brown communities, and low-income neighborhoods. And so we know that several of the communities that are going to be impacted have higher poverty rates and also higher Black and brown people than the city overall. And then, as Ani mentioned, the expansion will also cause the removal and relocation of many families in several public housing units. TxDOT has simply conceded that the roadway design has serious environmental justice impacts without attempting to examine whether it will perpetuate the history of discrimination and segregation in the city. So given the history of these neighborhoods and dominant makeup of Black and brown people, we know that TxDOT is making known its discriminatory intent by moving forward with this project. And so ultimately, the lives of Black and brown people are simply being disregarded.
Thank you. Alex, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Bakia mentioned the air quality and environmental issues that highway widening projects can create for nearby communities, but there are also larger consequences for the climate. So what role does highway widening play in increasing emissions from driving, and how do we avoid that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, a lot of people, including people who are responsible for making decisions about how we invest in our infrastructure, think that widening our highways reduces congestion. But actually, very often the opposite is true. When you build out more highway capacity, you attract more people to drive on that new capacity, and that makes congestion worse. It's this phenomenon called induced demand, or sometimes induced driving. But what it really comes down to is the individual choices that people make over when to drive, how far to drive, or sometimes even whether to drive. So, you know, for example, if people in your community know that traffic is really bad, they'll avoid driving if they can, especially during rush hour. So if someone needs to go buy something at the store, they may decide to hold off for a few hours so they don't get stuck in traffic after work. Or they might choose to take a job that's closer to home so they don't have to be stuck in traffic as long. Or they'll choose to take public transportation if that's available to them so they can avoid driving altogether. But when you add new lanes, you're changing people's perceptions over how bad traffic is going to be. And so maybe that person will drive to the store during rush hour, or maybe that person will choose the job that's further away because they think, hey, there's new highway lanes, we'll just be able to breeze down the highway now. Traffic won't be a problem. But all these new people start driving as a result of the new capacity. And so you actually get more traffic, not less. And the data actually backs that up. A study came out just last year which found that highway capacity and driving increase in exact one-to-one proportion with each other. So in other words, if you build out your highway capacity by an additional 5%, you'll get 5% more driving over time. And within 5 years, any of that congestion relief you got as soon as those new lanes open, which does happen, but it disappears within 5 years entirely. And obviously we build our infrastructure to last longer than 5 years. So we're building more and more congestion into the system. And this has a direct connection to climate. You know, more highway expansion means more driving, and more driving means more emissions. And in fact, emissions from driving has been increasing by the year, even though the fuel efficiency of our vehicles has been improving because people are driving more and more. Now, to be clear, we don't vilify driving. Cars and trucks are a really important part of our way of life and our economy. But if we're going to reduce emissions from driving and from transportation writ large, we have to tackle this issue where policymakers think we can build ourselves out of congestion, because it's just not true. That's not how it works. And it does make carbon pollution worse.
Yeah, clearly we need to draw some more attention to that research. Matt, there's agreement on this panel that expanding our highways often isn't the right way to reduce congestion. So what is, as cities and states across the country are looking how to reduce congestion?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And first I would say, the off the bat, we shouldn't be judging the success of our transportation system by whether there is traffic or whether there is congestion or not, or by how fast we're able to get cars to where cars want to go. We should be judging the success of our transportation system based on the access that people have to the places that they need to go. And so that means, the first thing we should be doing is giving people more options. So people who can't drive or don't want to drive have good, frequent, convenient options, whether it's, a bus with a bus lane, or whether it's more trains, or whether it's good walking and biking options. So if there is traffic, even the people who can drive can decide not to avoid the traffic. But the more good options we give people, you see across the country where this happens, more people get out of their cars and actually traffic does somewhat free up. But then if you, like Alex was saying, you can't build your way out of traffic, but you can price your way out of traffic. So the real way to reduce congestion is through some sort of, and some form of road pricing. And road pricing is really effective at moving people. Alex was talking about this chain of decisions that people make. Well, creating a system where people make decisions where they're more spread out. So they might be driving at different times of day if it's cheaper to drive earlier or later, or they might be taking different roads, or they might be they might decide to take the bus instead because it's cheaper. And so some sort of congestion pricing or time of day pricing or road pricing is really the tried and true proven way to reduce congestion. Of course, it's not exactly a politically popular thing to suggest. So I think the groundwork that we need to lay is what Alex was talking about, which is increasing that public education and that decision maker education about the fact that building our way out of congestion doesn't work. And if we're really serious about reducing congestion, we have to sell those benefits to the public.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Vicki, I want to turn back to you here. A frequent issue with highway expansion projects is that communities being impacted often feel like the state DOT or whoever's managing the project isn't keeping their best interests in mind. This is even harder when the project lead isn't necessarily engaging with the community. Do you feel that the Texas DOT has been doing enough to engage with the community? And if not, what more could they be doing?
Well, thanks for that question. And before I answer it directly, I just want to be clear that this project really does not respect communities and perpetuates a long history of environmental injustice and racism in Houston. So yes, you may have heard that TxDOT has been engaging with communities more so than it has historically, but the question I would ask is that the benchmark that we want, and is that the ultimate goal? And then also it begs the question, which communities are they actually listening to? Because simply engaging communities doesn't mean that you're listening. They're not listening to the communities that will be adversely impacted by this project. And I think what's even more disrespectful about it is that they're not taking the time that's needed to be thoughtful about how to manage the displacement they will cause. In our case, they've offered very frivolous concessions to address the air quality impacts that they're choosing to impact on the most vulnerable communities. And they don't have any written commitments in place to address these adverse and disparate impacts that they themselves have identified in their own documents and reports and analysis. So in taking all of these actions, or in the absence of some of these actions, TxDOT is essentially making known its discriminatory intent with this project. They've given us no reason to believe or trust that they will act on the expressed desires of residents or the city of Houston more broadly. And as an example, we've had a number of meetings with TxDOT staff where they have made verbal commitments to address some of the air quality concerns that we have raised, but we have yet to receive any document in writing that outlines their plans to mitigate the increased exposure for air pollution to children. And in addition to that, TxDOT has offered nothing in writing to assure anyone that it will comply with the desires of local elected officials that have been expressed. And we all know that in this historic moment, and at a time when many across the country and throughout the world have shown leadership by taking immediate actions on racial injustice, that TxDOT has chosen not to do that. So from our perspective, the least that they could do is to heed to the community voices that are pleading for them to be a willing partner to establish a memorandum of understanding that Ani mentioned earlier. And what we want is for that memorandum of understanding to include some explicit language that would prevent future funding from TxDOT unless it complies with the terms of that memorandum of understanding. We also believe that that MOU should include a social impact assessment because of the large number or amount of displacement that the project is going to cause, so that they can appropriately plan for the communities that will be displaced. And so just back to the issue of the so-called community engagement. While all of these community engagement activities have been going on, TxDOT has moved forward and issued requests for proposals. And so suggesting that, the community engagement is really not going to influence how they plan to move forward with the project, because they're moving forward with the project regardless. And so the last thing I'll say, in the words of James Baldwin, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do.
Thanks, Bakia. Hopefully that MOU will ultimately come together. Infrastructure comes up a lot when we talk about the ongoing economic crisis and how to stimulate job creation and economic growth. Alex, a decade ago, the Recovery Act had a lot of money for transportation infrastructure, and many states spent most of their money on new highways. So is adding highway capacity the best way to create jobs? And if not, what should we be spending this limited amount of money on instead?
Yeah, there was a really important study done by Smart Growth America, which found that a lot of states, just as you said, spent a majority of their Recovery Act highway dollars on new capacity, on building new things, even though those, new construction projects don't give us the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to job creation. And, we're still in a period of double-digit unemployment right now as a result of the pandemic and the shutdowns and stay-at-home orders. If we want to get people back to work and not only recover our economy, but provide for long-term economic growth well into the future, we need to focus on repair and maintenance projects. These projects actually create more jobs per dollar invested than new construction projects do, and they create the jobs more quickly. And this is largely because, with new construction projects, you have to pay a lot of money and spend a lot of time on acquiring land and going through rigorous environmental and engineering design and all kinds of other review processes. But with repair and maintenance projects, you're getting the jobs hired and done more quickly. So when we're talking about economic stimulus, there's a lot of talk about infrastructure. This kind of a fix-it-first approach, where we put repair and maintenance front and center, will ensure that we're really maximizing those investments from a jobs perspective. And in addition to that, we have the added benefit of avoiding the emissions increases that come from new capacity, just like I was talking about earlier when we're expanding our highways. So Fix It First is really a win-win in terms of creating jobs, getting people back to work, but also addressing climate, or at least stopping it from getting worse. Now, to be clear, Fix It First does not mean that we never build anything new. I mean, there are, of course, highway projects that are worthy of being built, especially if they provide shortcuts, shorter trips, or if they improve connectivity, or if they move historic infrastructure like the viaduct in Syracuse, New York, that has really torn the African American community in Syracuse in half. I know that's something that we're going to talk about a lot in the next panel. If we're moving infrastructure that has harmed communities, that's good new construction. But we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than just building simply because we can. We need to make sure that new projects will improve connectivity, that they won't add to congestion and emissions, and that we can actually afford to maintain the new infrastructure for its entire life.
Thanks, Alex. I want to stick with you for a minute here. The House of Representatives recently passed the Surface Reauthorization Bill, just a year after a Senate committee advanced a highway bill. Is there anything in either measure that would address highway widening projects and some of the negative consequences they have, and what are the prospects for them becoming law?
Well, so last month, the House of Representatives passed its version of the Surface Reauthorization Bill, known as the INVEST Act, which was included in that larger trillion plus package that Jared mentioned at the beginning of this presentation called the Moving Forward Act. And the bill actually does include a fix-it-first provision. So the bill specifically would prioritize repair and maintenance within two of the largest formula funding programs that come out of the Highway Trust Fund that states and other project sponsors use to invest in their roads and highways and bridges. And importantly, it doesn't just prioritize them. It doesn't just say, let's focus on this. It adds some real teeth to that. And that's thanks to a bipartisan amendment that was championed by Congressman Troy Garcia of Illinois and Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, which was adopted in committee, which would require states or other sponsors that want to spend federal highway funding on new construction projects to actually present a financial plan that shows they can afford to maintain the new infrastructure for its entire life. And when you're talking about the cost of that infrastructure, we wouldn't just be looking at dollars and cents in terms of how much it costs to build it, but also costs in terms of emissions and in terms of whether that new infrastructure will actually help or hurt connectivity and mobility. Now, when you asked about prospects, time is definitely running short for Congress to pass a surface reauthorization bill this year. It is a mighty task, even in normal circumstances, but there's obviously a lot going on. And on top of that, there's election season. So it's looking increasingly likely that there's going to be some sort of short-term extension of the current surface reauthorization, the FAST Act, which would buy Congress some time. We don't know how long that extension would be, but Congress would have more time to work on something longer term. But to be clear, Third Way is absolutely supportive of what is in the Moving Forward Act on Fix It First and various other provisions in the bill that would really address climate and emissions from transportation, specifically from surface transportation. So we absolutely encourage our friends in Congress in both the House and the Senate to really fight strongly for the Fix It First provisions and the other climate-related provisions in whatever Congress will end up putting forward in the coming months.
Thanks, Alex. Matt, I want to turn to you. It's kind of one thing to talk about highway widening among ourselves, but it's another thing to get policymakers to understand why highway expansion often isn't the right move. For people who want to send a message to their state or federal elected leaders, what messages should advocates be sending right now, and who needs to hear it?
Yeah, well, politicians at every level love a good ribbon cutting. Because these projects are usually politically popular, right? Because they can go to their constituents and say, traffic is bad, your commute is bad, here's this project that we got funded that we're gonna undertake. This is why we call them at USPIRG, it's why we call them boondoggles. They have the appearance of value with in actuality serving very little value. So what message we need to be sending to our decision makers and our policymakers is that what we build and our infrastructure, we want that to reflect our values. We want healthier, more connected, more equitable communities. We want to address the climate crisis. We want more transportation options so that we can actually get where we need to go in a convenient, safe, fast, frequent way, whether it is by driving or whether it is by bus or train or walking or biking. And we just know that expanding highways doesn't do that. And so I think, really the messages that work really well are those community building, quality of life, and public health messages. We want our kids to be able to breathe. We want our kids to be able to breathe clean air and not have skyrocketing rates of asthma. And so, getting that, so that, I think that's the message. Getting that across is the second question, and who do we get it across to? And really with transportation policy, you've got three levels. You've got the local level, you've got the state level, and you've got the federal government, all of which have some hand in these decisions. And the way we like to look at it is you really want to go bottom up with this. You start in your community, you get your local decision makers who are most likely to see the actual impacts that you're talking about. Portland, the I-5 highway that I was talking about before is a really good example of this. It's been going on for several years. At first, the mayor, all of the city council, all of the local elected officials were all for this because it was this great ribbon cutting. We're going to help fix traffic. The activists really targeted them really hard and have been doing it for a long time, both on a climate and a health and a community building message. And just recently, all of the local public officials withdrew their support for this project, which makes it really hard then for the state to go forward with it. So I think you really want to start bottom up, get the local officials on your side. And the more you're able to get local officials to cancel or question these big projects, then the harder it is for the state to then go ahead and say, we're going to fund and put forward these projects. And then certainly, on the federal level, because often the federal government holds the purse strings, being able to have these local officials saying, we don't want this money coming to us with our hands tied, that this has to go to highway expansion. We want to build out our bus rapid transit network. We want to build our bike network. That's really going to help with, whenever they do pass the next long-term bill. It's going to help if they know that local officials are saying, yes, we want this. You got to get the message to all three levels, but I think you really start at that local level, and the more you can get your local officials on, the better you're going to be down the line.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, that's important advice for advocates. I'd like to transition and move to some of the audience submitted questions, and a reminder to all viewers, feel free to submit questions if you have them for our panelists. The first question here, I believe, is for Bakia, based off of some of what you were saying, Bakia, in terms of the calls upon the local TxDOT and Houston-Galveston Area Council and what they should be doing. All of these reasonable arguments and alternatives have been presented to these two parties over and over for the past 2 years. Are they showing any attention to any of these facts? And if so, to which ones? What are the goals most important to them?
Yeah, so I will say that they have shown a little bit. So for instance, back last year, we were able to get about $50 million set aside for community mitigations for communities in segments 1 and 2 along the corridor to try to address some of these issues. For HGAC's part, they have suggested or recommended that we have low emission zones near the schools, and perhaps electrify the school buses. Those are great concessions, I guess, but the reality of the situation is that children need to play, and they need to be able to play outside. And so basically, telling them, hey, we're going to build this highway anyway, but you probably won't want to go outside because it's going to adversely impact your health is really not a solution to the problem. We're going to bus you on an electric bus, but then you have to stay inside all day, really is not a solution to this issue. So I will say that they have acknowledged it by recommending, certain steps that could potentially be taken, but in our opinion, those are not the correct steps or the only steps that need to be taken.
Thank you. Matt, we have a question for you, asking you to expound on what you think of Houston's I-45 project.
Yeah, well, so this project was included in one of our versions of Highway Boondoggles, I think our most recent version. And so, like Bakia and like Alex, we think that it's the it is not the right way for Houston to go and for Texas to go in order to solve some of the transportation problems that the city is facing. And obviously, for all of the reasons Bakia is talking about, and there are the health and community benefits to not building this and to doing other things. But then also, to the simple fact that it's not going to solve the problems. And Houston has seen this in the past. When Houston widened the Katy Freeway a number of years ago to become one of the widest highways in the world, within a couple of years, rush hour traffic times were worse than they had been prior to the widening. And Texas is already has significant highway debt. They're paying every year. They're paying a lot of money to pay off debt service on their highways, and that's money that could be going into things that would provide more value for the people of the state. So like everyone else here, we really think that it's not the right thing to go ahead and build this highway expansion.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Of the whole panel, I would ask the next question: would better access to equitable housing and resources influence this project and future projects similar to this? Does that play a role?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It's better access.
Yeah, whether better access to equitable housing would have any impact on this kind of expansion project.
I think in general, better access to housing that is built near better transportation options is what has a really big impact, and that should be affordable. There should be more affordable housing built in areas that have access to transit or have easier access to get to the places where people need to go without having to get on a highway to get everywhere, or get in your car to get everywhere, or even if you're getting in the car if it's shorter trips. If we're building our communities so that they actually have access to these places, then the
I'm loud enough to say I'm ready to speak.
Oh, there you are.
I think we'll need someone else to address that. Go.
Yeah, well, the appeared need for the expansion starts to lessen, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to just
yeah.
a quick note to add to that. I think it's important. So that's really a conversation too about land use and where development takes place. And so when you have these, and I think Matt was talking about this before, when you have these highway expansion projects and how people make decisions about where to live, but then also how developers make decisions about where to develop, right? We've seen this pattern of when highways get expanded and they're built, right? The development follows farther and farther out. And so by continuing this kind of highway expansion mindset, we're really contributing to the ongoing sprawl that has happened.
Thanks, Bakia. And I've just gotten word that Congresswoman Jackson Lee is here, so we're going to pause this panel, and I believe Jared can transition us.
Are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Someone going to introduce me.
Yeah,
Hello?
so I'm sorry, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. So right now on the call, we have Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, who has graciously agreed to provide comments on remarks for this event. Thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. Would you please tell us why this is important?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and let me acknowledge the panelists and the moderator, Daphne, and as well the executive director, John Cowan, and my constituents who represent a wide breadth of knowledge, activism, and success in leadership. Tamara and Tanya and Susan, thank you so very much for your presence. and thank you for this moment. Third Way's history is well known in trying to be problem solvers, and I'd like to think that I am one that sees a problem and then seeks a solution. But I also am one that understands the importance of the people's voice, and democracy is only as strong as its ability to hear its weakest voice. And voices are weak when they are juxtaposed against money and tradition. And when I say tradition, if Texas, among other states, longstanding tradition is to build roads over and over again, to interfere, and some would say destroy neighborhoods, to foster gentrification so that there are those who lose their livelihood, lose their homes, lose their history, lose their culture, then those voices that are opposing that may be the weakest voice. But democracy can only be strengthened when all voices are heard. I've made an effort to engage the people when I have moved legislative items, and my legislative agenda, my motto, my theme, my manifesto, if you will, is that the power that is vested in me is to be pushed out to the people. And so it was for almost 2 decades that I had to work, starting from the Houston City Council, to move Houston toward a mindset of transit mobility. We're not where we need to be. We are a large geographic area, but one of the early successes of my legislative life in Washington was to, in essence, single-handedly deal with President Obama's administration on finally, after petitioning from all of our constituents, trying to get light rail that would be effectively utilized for people who needed access to mobility, who were low income, who needed to get jobs. We're not where we need to be, but it brought us the first crunch of $900 million, almost $1 billion to Metro to build the lines that we see now into the north side of Houston and into the east and southeast side of Houston. Most of those buildings or construction, although they had some impact, went along the traditional feeder patterns or streets that didn't take as much of the culture of the community. It impacted some, but it did not take all. In fact, what we attempted to do is to bring neighborhoods, older neighborhoods, into the mainstream of wealth and economic opportunity. As we move forward, we are now confronting the same nightmare that we confronted with the expansion of 59 North and I-69, which went through Fifth Ward. That was a project that started long before I went to the United States Congress, but I had to fight for Fifth Ward, the birthplace of Barbara Jordan and the home of Mickey Leland, my predecessors, to even have a off-ramp in Fifth Ward, so that you had Fifth Ward literally divided by this expansion, and they had the gall to not even want to have an off-ramp for that community to have a lifeline if it had to get to the medical center or Ben Taub. And it divided neighborhoods such that schools began to lose population. This is what happens when we constantly listen to the voices of power. We don't listen to the people. I think it is extremely important to foster this important element of any sort of road construction project that takes in billions of federal dollars, and it does take in billions of federal dollars. In the spirit of trying to preserve history through the advocacy of my constituents, I led on the passage of H.R. 434, the National Emancipation Historic Trail Act, Study Act. It is now a law, and the good news is we'll be announcing that this particular trail will be at the top of the list for the work that has to begin starting October of 2020. We fought hard to get it acknowledged as a #1 item to be viewed by the National Park Service. That is relevant to I-45 construction, because it seems that what happens is besides the funding that the state seeks, it does have a certain independence in funding that comes from the state, particularly a state that sees roads as more important than education. For decades, we've been fighting for an education formula to be able to provide funding for our low-income neighborhoods and our low-income schools or our children at risk. That has been quagmired in the courts. The legislature's had a difficult time finding a resolution to spend the money to continue to encourage and increase the educational levels of our children, but they have no problem finding billions of dollars for contractors, cement contributors, asphalt contributors, architects, and others. That is what I think this third way presentation is about. There has got to be, and I think I heard someone indicate how they had petitioned in their area, and I assume the results of that is that they had listened. That is what we will have to continue to do, and we will have to do it with the, how should I say, our own intelligence. And when I say that, I'm talking about our own intel, because meetings are held, particularly under COVID-19, which is a devastating atmosphere that we're in right now in the hotspot states, which includes Texas, California, right now Georgia, and Florida, and we're in the midst. My district has some of the highest rates of COVID, and I've spent my time trying to test. But even in the midst of that, these projects can go forward while individuals are out of work, while individuals are focusing on their sick relatives, or maybe people that they have lost. That is the devastation of democracy that doesn't listen to the weakest vote and the weakest voice, because they can go on their own power. They don't have to be stopped by COVID-19. And so I've tried to keep the pressure on. And the last meeting that was held in Austin, I actually came in virtually from Washington. And I came in virtually to speak with all due depth, if you will, on opposing I-45 without the input of the constituents of which I particularly speak of. I spoke of the historic nature, and I spoke for the fact that this had been planned for almost 2 decades, now 14 years. Most people have not heard about it. If they did, they might have started out at the beginning of the 14 years. Then they had to get into other crises in our community. And when you live in low income or older neighborhoods, you have one crisis after another. It may be fighting to save Medicare and Social Security. And so I-45, I-69, I-10, and 288 over the decades have threatened these neighborhoods, and they've threatened the near north side, which is Latinx and Hispanic. They've threatened Independence Heights, 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, and beyond. These are all neighborhoods that deal with people who have sometimes the weakest voices. They likewise take away housing. So Clayton Homes is going to be completely destroyed. We should oppose that to the extent that we must find a place to either say restore Clayton Homes as it is, brand new, and detour your I-45 not to pierce into the oldest city that was created in the city of Houston, old neighborhoods like 3rd Ward, North McGregor, South McGregor, Southmore, and others. So in the appropriations bill, you have to constantly be diligent. That is one of the concerns, because they know that those of us who are fighting against it, we have a multitude of fights to be engaged in. But as the transportation appropriations bill was coming, I have put into law that my amendment says it prohibits the Department of Transportation from using funds for Section 106 transportation construction projects in urban areas that have not been determined to meet the statutory and fiduciary obligations of the National Historic Preservation Act. That is now law in the House bill on transportation. And further, amendment provides $1 million in assistance to address challenges faced by communities impacted by persistent poverty and are not included in decision-making when major highway construction threatens their homes, businesses, and culturally significant structures. Because when advocacy groups are trying to work, they're working on a wing and a prayer. They're not working on major funding, which the Texas Department of Transportation has, or cities have, or counties have, who are jumping for joy and not providing any opposition, because it is money in their community, in defense of them. It's money in their community. It doesn't bother them. Their city is big, so if one part of the city gets knocked to its knees, they still have the other part, and they are given the message, once this is done, it'll just provide all kinds of opportunity for people. There'll be no people there. So it won't provide any opportunity for anyone because there will be absolutely no one there. So I spoke at TxDOT, my office, Lily Coney, and my opposition is such that we're hoping that we're on the list to be able to be heard. In addition, I'll be meeting with the chairman of TxDOT and as well the commissioner who is to technically represent the area that we're in, seeking to have the voices of the people heard again. My view is that it needs to have a revisit to the drawing board. Part of the other opposition that we have is that it allegedly is supposed to be for flood mitigation. And of course, in Houston, having experienced Hurricane Harvey, we are flood intimidated. And so if someone says it's flood mitigation, people just keel over. I'm not willing to keel over because I happen to know the science, the engineering, and I know that you can always find an alternative route or structure to get something done. We saw that happen with Metro when over the years, starting with Kathy Whitmire and beyond, we started talking about a aerial metro. They were trying to look underground. There were many different machinations about how the train could go and still are. So the point is that I think this session that we're having is extremely important. I want to encourage those who are going to be panelists from Houston that the fight is not over, that what we need to do is we need to draw in a more potent group of numbers. We need numbers. We need churches. We need organizations to pour people out into a massive protest and petition that can be seen visibly that these neighbors, and if elderly people need to have designees, because I know it's hard for them, but we need to be able to show that this is not going to be a project that the community is going to be able to agree with. And these federal funds are the dollars of the taxpayers. They're of these homeowners. They're not willy-nilly dollars for TxDOT, Texas Department of Education, of Transportation, to use as it may desire. Let me conclude by saying that there's something that America seems sometimes to ignore, which is one of the reasons why I've introduced legislation for a Juneteenth national holiday that has got bipartisan support, while we passed the Emancipation Trail Act, which is the only act that has ever in the history of this nation even countered to speak about slavery, and of course, introduced H.R. 40, which is a commission to study and develop proposals dealing with reparations. And we will find the hot pockets of inadequacies and disparities are in the African-American community and of course, Latinx. And here we come again using tax dollars, federal dollars, to create more disparities by displacing people, throwing poor people out of housing, and basically destroying the beauty and the cultural and the historic nature of this of our great communities. I still call the wards. And for those of you not from Texas, First Ward, Second Ward, Third Ward, Fifth Ward, and Sixth Ward. This is how Houston was organized. I still call it that. I do not call all these funny names because it dismisses all of those who helped build this particular city, and many of those were people of African American heritage. I resent the reimagining and the interpreting and stealing from our history. Transportation projects can do that. They can also be positive. They can also help move poor people from one place to the next, help them get their jobs, help elderly get to where they are. Mobility and transit is something I think that we should look at because we can design it in such a way that it empowers the community. It doesn't destroy the community. Let me conclude by saying it is a passion of mine, but I don't want it to be a passion without works. Many of us know by your work shall you be judged. I am still mourning the loss of John Robert Lewis, who he often called himself the boy from Troy. And having been a student and friend and sister of John for a number of years in the United States Congress, 25 in fact, we openly acknowledge that I loved him as a brother and he loved me. So the mourning still continues, but I do understand in his challenge to us in the op-ed that appeared on the day of his funeral, that it is clear that he was willing to risk his life for justice. And in his speech, he said, "I'm tired of being beat. I'm tired of being arrested. I want our freedom now." And so I would just simply say to our communities, here we are again in 2020, where we want our freedom now. And together, I believe that we have to say that to transit projects, to those who want to deny dollars for people who are desperately in need, who are unemployed, people who won't wear masks. We want our freedom now. And the freedom is that the freedom is holistically for all of the people, not just for some. And it's for the greater good, not just for some. So thank you for allowing me to offer these words. I hope that Third Way will be part of organizing a massive effort, helping, of course, this community, Houston, Texas, on the issue of empowering people to be able to be stewards, conductors, and architects of how federal dollars are spent in their community. We're not against progress, absolutely not. But what we want to have is the voices of the people heard as progress proceeds. We know how to design economic engines for our community. We know how to ensure that if it is a freeway, that it works for all of the community, not just for some. Thank you all so very much for having me.
So much, Congresswoman. We really appreciate you joining us today and for your remarks. And thank you as well to all of our panelists here, Bakia, Matt, and Alex, for what I think was a really activating discussion. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Danae King. Please allow us a moment to reconfigure the call.
I want to start by thanking each of you for joining the event today. I am Dr. Danae King. I am a native Houstonian and an environmental justice researcher at Texas Southern University in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. My background is in environmental toxicology, and for over 15 years, I've had the pleasure of working with community experts, similar to the panelists today, to identify, prioritize, and advocate for environmental justice and equity concerns in communities of color. Today, we will hear from 3 community experts who are knowledgeable and passionate about their communities and the concerns related to highway expansion. The panel includes Ms. Susan Graham, who is a community activist who lives in Houston's near North Side, which is a historic Latinx community immediately east of the I-45 North Corridor and north of downtown Houston. In 2019, Ms. Graham launched the StopTex.I-45, which is a grassroots movement to push the Texas Department of Transportation to go back to the drawing board and redesign the highway project that so many of the communities of colors share. And then our next panelist will be Tamara Bell, who serves as the president of the McGregor Super Neighborhood Association, which is a neighborhood that lies in the historically Black Greater Third Ward community. Ms. Bell also serves as the chair of the Health and Public Safety Committee for the Super Neighborhood Alliance, which advises the mayor on behalf of all Houston's neighborhoods. Ms. Bell is an outspoken community leader who frequently appears on television and newspapers, defending her community and promoting economic development. She has been active in multiple fights against highways impeding in her community. Ms. Tanya DeVos is the executive director of Independence Heights Redevelopment Corporation, which seeks to preserve the history and to improve economic opportunity in the first Black incorporated city in the state of Texas. Tanya has played a critical role in developing and protecting the Emancipation Trail from Galveston to the Independence Heights neighborhood in Houston, and she's actively fought to mitigate flooding, develop economic resources, and preserve housing in her community. So let's get started with our panelists. They're going to describe to us how they are involved in the I-45 project and what motivated them to get involved. And we'll start with you, Susan.
Hi, I am honored today to be invited to speak and on behalf of my neighborhood near Northside and StopTex.I-45. You know, I initially got involved in this project as a member of my civic club and Super Neighborhood 51. And we pored over maps, we read reports, we tried to find out how this project was going to affect our neighborhood. And we wrote letters to TxDOT and we contacted elected officials, but we didn't get anything back. We didn't feel heard and we didn't feel listened to. And we decided that we had to make this project more visible. You know, residents that live in our communities struggle with a lot of things, and it's very hard for them to show up sometimes for their community or even to notice what's going to be happening to them until it's already half over. They work multiple jobs, they take care of kids, you know, it's difficult for them to be involved. So, you know, I never intended to start StopTex.I-45, but in an effort to become more visible, it sort of came out of that effort. And one of my friends over at Bike Houston suggested that we make some yard signs and blanket the near north side with yard signs. It said, freeway, no way. So we did that, and we went to community meetings, and we took some flyers and some information and a sign-up sheet and a little donation can, and we became StopTex.I-45, and we've been active now for a little over a year. And I think we've made progress in making this more visible, but we're not where we need to be by any means. You know, my neighborhood, along with Tanya's and Tomorrow's and many other neighborhoods in Houston, are going to again be burdened with the problems with this freeway. And our mayor has said that this project could be transformational for the city of Houston if done right. But we wondered, transformational for who? What did right look like? And who was going to bear the burden? Who was going to make the benefits? And who was going to make those decisions about what right was? And we weren't hearing that. We weren't hearing that from our elected officials. So one of the first things that we decided to do was to get involved in the municipal elections in 2019. We asked a lot of questions. We put our questions at the candidate forums, and in an attempt to elect new city council members that would be more favorable to our cause. And we did manage to do that. We elected several that were more to our cause, and we converted our Councilmember Carlos Cisneros over to our side through the process of this, because everybody believes what TxDOT says, that it's going to make the freeway safer and it's going to fix congestion. And that that we have to do this to fix those things. But when you educate people and let them know that neither one of those things is going to happen, the congestion won't be fixed in the long term because of this. And that the only thing that might be safer is the freeway, but our streets won't be safer. Our pedestrians won't be safer. Our bike riders won't be safer. And we'll have increased noise and pollution. Our kids will be exposed to more air pollution in areas that already have elevated rates of asthma. They'll have to be walking under freeways that are 20 lanes wide to get to their school on the other side. We were hemmed in this neighborhood starting in the 1950s with what we call 59, which is now the Interstate 69. And then in the 60s by the old I-45, the one we have now, and then the 610 loop on our north side. So we're already hemmed in, and all the things that are going to happen with this project happen with those. People are displaced from their homes. Our flooding got worse in our neighborhoods. People lost, we have more air pollution, more noise pollution, and we were disconnected from the city. We were disconnected from our neighbors. We were disconnected from the heights and that on our west side, disconnected from the east end on the east side, and disconnected from Independence Heights and North Line on the north side. And we're going to be more disconnected by this project. They're taking away access to downtown and access to other areas of the city. And so that's why I got involved, and that's why I'm here. So.
Thank you, Susan. So tomorrow, tell me why you got involved, and also let me know what success would look like with the I-45 project. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
There you go. All right. Thank you all so much for the invitation. I am so happy to see that a national group is looking at the fights that we're going through in Houston. A bit of my background, as you said, I've been in many fights with TxDOT, Harris County Flood Control, City of Houston, Metro, you name it, we'd have bumped heads before. And one of the reasons is because the community that I live in, which is a part of Third Ward, is a very, very important historical community. Over 60 years ago, this is where the wealthiest Jewish families in Texas lived. And through the years, it became a prominent African-American community. 3 streets from me is where Debbie Allen and Felicia Rashad lived. 1 street over is where Beyonce was raised. Down the street from me is where the producer of Empire, Attica Locke's family lives. So we have a lot of history in our neighborhood. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is a part of my super neighborhood, as is State Senator Boris Miles. Barbara Jordan's church is a block over. I attend that church, Good Hope. And so we have been fighting encroachment over and over. 288 decimated our area. It split us. And I'm not talking in the 60s. I'm talking about that project wasn't finished until 1978. So that's fairly recent for us. Recently, the Ardmore Bridge, which Harris County Flood Control was removing and didn't even have the decency to tell us, and that is our way, that is our egress and regress into the medical center. And with an aged population, the last thing you need an ambulance or a fire truck figuring out is which way to go. So because I knew about what I've seen from TxDOT, I always look at the details. What I found so disingenuous about this project is how it got delivered to us. The first time I heard about this project was 2017. Now, whether you all are national, local, world, whatever, in Houston, everybody know what happened in 2017. Harvey hit us. And I mean, Harvey knocked us down. I mean, unimaginable devastation. More rain than had been recorded ever since recording water. And in many minority communities, but let me not be clear, because Harvey did not discriminate. It didn't care if your house was worth $2 million or $2. It hit you hard, and I'm not kidding. But where they're proposing this project, decimated that area. Clayton Homes, Kelly Courts, Fifth Ward, Cashmere Garden, all those communities devastated over there. And so it's like you talking about going more from, pervious to impervious, and you telling us that's gonna help? How is that gonna help? I don't have to be a structural engineer to know that that does not work. And you telling us that you're gonna take freeways that are above ground and put them below ground, but don't y'all worry about it, it's gonna be okay. No, because I don't want 5th Ward, 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, or the near north side to be your detention pond because you didn't put in adequate, because you don't ever put in adequate detention ponds. And then after it floods, what do you say, TxDOT? Oh, it's not our job to mitigate flooding. It should be your job when you cause the flooding. Because going back to what he said earlier about I-10 was supposed to be the of freeways. Oh my God, biggest freeway ever. You won't have no congestion, you won't have nothing, and flooding will stop. Somebody was killed within 3 weeks of them opening up the freeway because of flooding. So that is why I'm involved in this. And let me tell you what getting it right would look like, because I agree 100% with Susan. When people tell you that, you better ask them what's right to you, because what might be right for you ain't right for me. I mean, and that's the thing. You said, but it's common sense. Common ain't common to everybody. It depends on what's common to them. So let me tell you what would look right for me. One of the things that I'm deeply concerned about, they got an F on economical social injustice, and they act like the F wasn't there. I can't applaud Dr. Bakia Nelson them enough, because if they hadn't been sounding the alarm, we would not be where we are, okay? And we all went middle of the day over to Houston Galveston Area Council, where they were about to get their first funding. I mean, if over 100, they never had that many people show up in the history of the group, okay, ever. They sat around that table, said, okay. Y'all through talking? Because we heard you, but we wasn't listening, okay? Because they heard everything we said, and they voted and passed that $100 million. They did it anyway. So what I hope, because the federal, they hold the purse strings. I'm so glad Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is involved and is listening to us and is on the Transportation Committee, okay? Because that's what scares them when they think somebody may grab their purse strings. Because the point of them building this, remember now, y'all, this was before COVID. Now, anybody say COVID ain't a game changer, you ain't looking or living on the planet we call Earth, that third rock from the sun. Because COVID is a game changer. And one of the things New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, all worried about is anybody gonna go back to work downtown? Because you see, the purpose of this freeway is to get them folks as quick as you can out of Houston and back to the Wonderlands. And I call the Wonderlands Sugarland, Woodland, Pearlands. That's the Wonderlands. You want to get them to the Wonderlands, get them away from Oz, and get them back out there to where they singing in the rain. So I'm telling you, this is a game changer. Do we really need this now? Because I'm telling you, if you're a commercial real estate broker in any place in America, you sweating bullets. Because you know, some people like dressing up like this at the top and have on shorts at the bottom. They love it, okay? They love it. They only got to put a little makeup on and it look okay on Zoom. Now, personally, y'all, I ain't a fan of Zoom, but I got to work with this right now. But at any rate, I'm telling you, this is a game changer, because this was about how many people going to be coming downtown, how that was going to grow, how that was going to increase, and they want to make sure these people can go. Baby, that's not even a conversation you can have at this moment, and somebody going to believe you. Because those people are not coming back. They are not. If they don't have to come back, they are not coming back. So then again, now, where are we? Because that's billions of dollars. And I can assure you, like the Congresswoman said, that they had already picked out the concrete contractor. They had already put out the pavement. They had already put out the rebar. They already knew who they was giving it to. They already knew. So now how can we get those resources and reallocate them so that they can serve a purpose for what it was meant to be? Betterment, but betterment for us, not for them. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you. All right, Miss Tanya. So if you had to tell people, Houstonians or people outside of Houston, what would you tell them about this project and particularly how it impacts your community? Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. King, and thank you to the other panelists that are here and everyone who has made it possible for us to be on this call. First of all, I'm Tanya DeBose, and I'm with the Independence Heights Redevelopment Council, and our work is really focused on improving the quality of life in the first African-American municipality in the state of Texas, known as Independence Heights. Our work centers around revitalization, but also historic preservation. I am a fourth generation descendant of the people who started the community of Independence Heights. I came to the community as a young child going to church there. As we started to do this work, what I learned was the history of my own family and the role that they played in the establishment of this community. My great-grandfather bought a house there in 1924 during the time of the original city. At that time, his home was on 30th Street, which really comprised 30th Street through 40th Street was the original city of Independence Heights. And for those of you who are not in the city of Houston, the edge of the city of Houston was 29th Street. So the Black people who bought property bought it outside of what was the original city boundaries, which started at 30th Street, and that's how Independence Heights became that place. When he purchased his house, it was in the 700 block of 30th Street, and I never knew that house. And the reason I never knew that house was because in 1959, a freeway came through, and it took him and 330 of the other homeowners in that area, mostly on the African-American side, wiped them clean out. So when they came to us in 2017 and talked about the fact that they were going to widen this freeway and it was going to take out some of our community, it immediately sounded an alarm for us, just as it did the other panelists here. To top it off with everything else that was going on, we had just lost 87 homes to the new build of Booker T. Washington High School in our community. So 87 homes, it's no telling how many families were in that home. The next thing was in 2001, we had already been slated to have our east side of our neighborhood bought out because of flooding. And then we had just been notified a couple of years prior that they were going to take out 163 homes in the northern end of our neighborhood. And now here we come with TxDOT saying, we're going to need to borrow a couple of your homes, including your multifamily housing that is along the feeder road. And remember, when Independence Heights was founded, it was founded on land ownership and building a house so that African-American families could feel like they have a place too in this city. So we didn't have a lot of multifamily. So all of our multifamily was along that feeder road, and they populate our schools. And so now I didn't no longer look at this as a freeway that needed to come in so that people who live in the suburbs could get out and make it easier for other people. The fight became about, how do I make sure that our people do not get displaced in this community? And it also then started to couple over with, we're in the middle of historic preservation. We're in the middle of making sure that this environment stays around so that current and future generations can experience it in its authentic environment, not by reading the sign to say, this was here one day, one time, back in this, year. We still have that environment, and we deserve to have a right to save that environment. And so as we learn more and more about the history of how infrastructure projects impact our communities, we reached out to all of our elected officials, to our Councilwoman Carla Cisneros. We were already dealing with flooding, as Tamara said, from, every flood that comes through Houston hits our neighborhood. And so we were already dealing with that. We reached out to our Congresswoman because they're using federal dollars. And we had a historic district. We're a national historic district. And when the report was done by TxDOT, none of that was mentioned. And so we reached out to her to make her aware of that. We had other people like Link Houston and airlines talking about connectivity and also talking about, you know, air quality for our kids. There are 2 schools that are along, you know, this project that are going to be impacted, and our kids do walk to school from there. The other things that that we looked at too was with our mayor. There was a group that was put together to look at how it was going to impact Houston. And that group really looked at how it was going to impact downtown. And for them, it was going to be a plus. But for us, it was going to be at our expense. And so thinking back on my great-grandfather, 2 generations out of slavery, to be able to come from Wharton County into the city of Houston and actually purchase a home, him and 600 other families purchasing a home. And when they couldn't get infrastructure to hook up in what was the city of Houston proper, they decided to start their own community so that they could chart their own path, do their own infrastructure, have their own post office, city hall, and 3 African-American mayors. When you think about that historically happening, and then to come down to my generation, and I'm still fighting those same battles that he might not have had the opportunity to be on a national program to talk about how it was happening in. I could not sit still. My spirit would not let me sit still and not bring attention to it. And so after we were omitted from the report, we reached out to Lone Star Legal Aid, and they said, this is definitely a case of environmental injustice, cultural erasure, and continued displacement in a time when a city is already struggling with where is affordable housing going to be at. And so I don't remember what the question was that you asked me, but I'm getting all of that out, and I hope that some of your question was answered in there. And the last thing that I would say, when we look at all of the things that have happened to communities of color across the board, Dallas, Austin, we look at communities that once were are now under freeways. You can't help but to continue to sound the alarm. And what I hope for in the future is that we're not just sounding the alarm, but that this conversation will continue, but not just be a conversation, but be a movement, a push back against this type of development coming in and erasing our communities, displacing people, and quite frankly, moving us from place to place to place. I don't need to go into how we got here, how we came on ships here, and then to have to look at this in the year of 2020 and see this happening. What we have to do as a people, mankind, humankind, is to think more compassionately about who are we really impacting, and the people who have for years lived in cones of inequality. We need to talk about how we can make our communities more equitable so that everyone can feel like this community can be my home too.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for the call to action. And thank you, ladies, for sharing your stories. You gave us great examples of how to get into good trouble, as the late Congressman Lewis said, and in the words of Congresswoman Lee, you taught us how to be problem solvers. So I appreciate you sharing your wonderful stories, and I will turn it back over to Jared.
Thank you, Dr. King, Susan, Tamaro, and Tanya. We really appreciate you today. And thank you everyone who attended today's panel. Please look forward to more events from Third Way. Also, please visit Link Houston's website to find out how you can get more involved. Everyone have a great Tuesday.